Hi, I'm Ahava. Today, I'm joined by my very smart friend, Steve Koch, who is the managing partner and co-founder of Cast Hue. I am very excited to get into it today. You've got questions, we've got answers. Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself and what Cast Hue does.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me, Ahava. Excited for this conversation. So Cast Hue, we're a human-centered design consultancy, and our work is really focused on understanding the human perspective that drives perceptions, that drives decisions, that really impacts how people view and see brands. And we're especially experience-driven, so we really want to understand from people every touch point of their experience with an organization, so we could see where we could improve that to really create a experience that builds loyalty, an experience that attracts new people. And we work with all sorts of brands, but healthcare is really our focus, and we're really passionate about that space. So always excited to talk with you and the great work you all are doing and how it all intersects.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. So I do think I'm very passionate about patients, unfortunately, having been a patient or the mother of a patient or the child of a patient. And it makes me really, really aware that the process of getting healthcare is not a linear one, but a ping pong. And
Right.
you're just constantly searching, constantly finding new pieces of information, evaluating them. When you are talking to a client about, let's say, patient journey mapping, and you're trying to help them understand how it's going to help them get closer to their goals, how do you frame it for them so that they can then say, okay, this makes sense. This is something that we want to do? Because a lot of the patient journey maps and personas that we look at feel very thin to us. They don't really capture what is a lot of what you're talking about, which is that like real human element of being afraid, not knowing, feeling overwhelmed. So how do you set the expectation that this is how we're going to move the needle for you by doing this exercise?
I think that's a great point because it really brings up a couple of the challenges that a person can run into when they're approaching journey mapping. Because there are all sorts of ways to journey map. And when I hear journey mapping, I start to think, okay, well, let's explore this. What are you actually doing to create this journey? And the overall element that I always stress is we want it to be human informed. We want to talk to the people experiencing that journey. And the two areas that people can trip up a little bit or maybe a hurdle in the spirit of efficiency is number one is creating a journey map based on all sorts of data sources that they have. So they may say, okay, we have CAP scores. We can do some analysis of our reviews. We can pull in call center transcripts. Those are all great, and those are great foundational information, but they're not telling us the why, and that's where we can really miss things. And that's where we want to have patients involved. And then the second part is that where people can get tripped up is we have this thing, and it's what you said, which is true. We're all patients, but we shouldn't be patients that participate in journey mapping research because we're patients. You and I and our clients are patients that have biases built in. We know how the journey should be going. We know what some of the trip points are throughout. Our clients, the folks at leading marketing or leading strategy or leading experience at a health system, they've helped design what that's supposed to be. Even nurses at a health system know what it's supposed to be. And so that's the other thing we'll run into where you see people bring together staff members, parts of their care teams and say, we're all patients too, and build that journey. And again, some good foundational information there, but those biases are built in. And what we're gonna miss in both of those approaches are the insights that make a difference, because those are what we'll get from your patients that are representative of the people you serve every day, because they're experiencing healthcare in an entirely different way. They don't think about it all the time like we do. And we want to get to those insights that can really help us understand, hey, is this a friction point? Is this a point of differentiation for us? Because those will help us determine if it's a friction point, how can we redesign it and make it better? If it's a point of differentiation, how does Ahava and her team highlight that through the communication? And beyond and beyond. But those are the two things that we want to think about where we're bringing value is let's get that real human perspective, understand what they're experiencing, and then we're going to be able to make an impact with the work.
So I have a mea culpa here because that's exactly how we used to do persona mapping. I would get the marketers in the room, and because I was a patient, I would listen to their understanding of what the patient experience was like. And I'd be like, guys, you have not been a patient or seen or talked to a patient in a really long time. And I think it's really important as I've matured in my own understanding. I think I've also said, we should probably pull ourselves out here. But I think the way that we did it was, okay, we went to the aggregated data, and we went to like, well, what can prove what we assume and what our biases are. And I think it's a really, really good point that one of the things we always talk about when we talk about plain language is superventricular tachycardia is a word that we're all very familiar with, and we say it all the time and we can pronounce it really quickly. But to most patients, like, why is my heart beating so fast? And it's
Right.
it's just that simple of trying to bridge the gap between I'm experiencing this thing. What is this thing called? How do I label this thing? And I think that that's exactly what you're saying, which is that we can't experience it for the first time because we're way too entrenched in it to even, that's a really great point. I think that's really, really helpful. That bridges into another thing that I wanted to ask you about, which I found very interesting. You recently posted on LinkedIn about, market data and survey and research and that kind of thing. And I read this really interesting white paper by Jerry Hobbs this morning, where he talked about this guy, Mark Pollard, who wrote a bunch of strategy and marketing books. And he has this thing called the 4 points. And at the 4 points is the problem. What's the human problem behind the problem? Advantage, what makes you unique and motivating? Then the last part is the strategy, a new way of seeing things. And then over here, there's this insight, which is like an unspoken truth that sheds light on a new topic. And I'm stuck on the problem because I often think like we're trying to solve a business problem, but I never think that way when I think about cultivating relationships with partners and clients and other vendors.
Right.
I think about like we're humans, like business is done with humans. So the problem is a human problem. It was like a mind blown experience for me. I wrote to Jerry, your white paper is fire. Because it really did give me this aha moment. Obviously I love those. Can you bridge what I just talked about with like your post about how people rely too much maybe on the data that they get? And then how do you really get inside beyond just talking to people, but like, what is the human problem? Because with healthcare, it's not always, I need a doctor. It could be a whole host of things that you're trying to solve for. I don't sleep well at night. My friend just posted on Facebook these like, I don't know, mushroom capsules. And I was like, you know what? I've tried everything. Might as well try these. That has nothing to do with a doctor. I've gone to my doctor. She's like, you're a woman of a certain age. Sorry, you don't sleep well. I mean, so how do you bridge that, that problem of like, what's the human problem when we're so tied into data?
It does really resonate with me because this idea around the human problem, and a couple of things to think about here. I think, first of all, going back to thinking about that qualitative versus quantitative, we do have a lot of surveys out there, right? I mean, in healthcare, it starts with CAPS, but then there's so much more. We're maybe doing NPS. We probably have other surveys out in the market. It gets us information really quickly. It gets us information passively. We're not doing a ton of work around it.
Ratings are a form of surveys.
Yeah, exactly. So we have all this data, and then we could start to say, okay, I think I see the problem. And this is where it kicks in, like just our human nature. I think, especially in when we're part of an organization and we have all these goals, and it's our human nature to say, I want to solve that problem, and we jump quickly to problem solving, right? And that's where we could get in trouble because we're missing the human problem. And so, from our perspective at Cast Hue, from, just thinking about this from a human-centered design perspective, the definition of human-centered design is putting the person at the center of all of your problem-solving activities. And so that's where we always say, let's take that step back. And are we really solving the problem of the person? How do we translate this business problem that we can see into the human problem?
And by the way, I just want to say human-centered design is the only design discipline that's actually named what it really is.
That's a good point too. I'm having aha moments. This is quite a time here.
Can you give an example of where not just looking at the data, but also combining that with the understanding of the human problem, reversed or changed or evolved what the client wanted to do inside of healthcare?
If we think about waiting in healthcare, it's always a huge challenge, right? And you'll see that in surveys, you'll see that in data. It might even be a theme in your Yelp reviews, like the wait's too long. I don't know how long I'm going to wait. And we may see that and say, okay, well then we've got to turn over, improve our throughput. And we've got to do all these things. The reason I was going to bring up design thinking is because we'll start with what we call a design challenge that comes out of the business problem. The design challenge is how do we improve the waiting experience? And then we work through that process to understand the problem from the patient's perspective. And then we get their problem statement. And then we solve based on that. And then the waiting, like in this case, what the problem statement showed is that it wasn't necessarily the wait itself. It was that loss of control, not understanding, not having any expectation or the wrong expectations of how long their wait was. And so we found that if we could improve the communication around waiting, the overall experience, patients would see that as a better experience.
I want to press on this waiting thing because there's, I think, a really great element here that research and data won't expose that I can expose. I'm actually going to change wait times now for everybody. Here we go. I'm going to drop it. Get ready. Okay. The wait in the waiting room is not the problem because they've got the boards and they show you like the first 3 letters of your name and you know when you're going to be taken back. You know when the wait gets horrible, when you're sitting alone in the room, feeling miserable, the doctors come in to see you, And then it's like you're in a zombie game, because what happened to the human beings that were here? Like, I'm locked in this room. I feel terrible. I don't know what's wrong with me. Maybe I have COVID. Maybe I have the flu. And that's where the communication can happen in a trustworthy way. Mrs. Leaptag, we're going to do your COVID test. It's going to take us 45 minutes to get the results.
Right.
We're a little backed up today. After I get the results, I'm going to have to make a determination of what to do. You might be sitting here for an hour. I just want to set that expectation for you. Do you want to go home and come back? Like, there's so many different ways to sort of handle that. And I think that when you plan a data thing, where's everybody going to get stuck? At the front door wait time. But that's not the wait time that's aggravating to people, because you've already solved for that wait time by communicating it. It's the next wait time that's aggravating to people. And unless you actually go into the clinic and watch the patient journey happen, you will forget about that second wait time. And that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's about communication. And that's why it's so important to have the patient's perspective and even the staff's perspective. We can understand that. So taking your example, that's a great example. And it's something that happens all the time. I mean, believe it or not, even with the boards, we still run into problems with wait times in the lobby, but we'll talk about that later. But no, that's a very common challenge, because here's something to think about. Like, what about the vernacular that providers use, whether they're nurses or MAs or whoever it might be, and they say, we'll have that for you in just a little bit. Well, in my 12-hour shift, 45 minutes is just a little bit, right? But it's all about perspective. But if I'm using that language with patients, what do we think a little bit is, especially if I'm at an urgent care, right? And so I think all those elements are important. I think you bring up an important point that's actually come out in our research a ton around just how do we set clear expectations? Because if I know it's going to be that hour, then I set my mind around that. And maybe I, think about, maybe I go home, maybe I can start reading a long article on my phone, and I know I'm going to spend some time to do things. But I think two things happen in healthcare. Number one, that, setting the right expectation, it'll just be a little bit longer, whatever that means, right? Or just not wanting to commit to anything because you don't want to be wrong. We want to be so precise in healthcare, but this is an area where we could say, and I love your example, where we could say, it's going to be about 45 minutes, but I also know it's a little backed up right now, so it could be longer. I want you to know that. And that makes a huge impact. And so, but all of that gets back to your original point around what's the human problem and how is it impacting them? How is it impacting their emotions? Then we could start solving and look at all of our alternatives there. We don't necessarily have to find a way to make the test faster. We just have to find a way to make the waiting experience better.
So you're saying the human problem is the loss of control that people feel because they don't know what's going to happen. And I actually would take it farther and say the real human problem is that you don't know what's wrong with you. The deeper loss of control. I mean, most of the time people go to urgent care, they have an ear infection, right? Like, you know what I mean? Usually it's not something major. But I remember one time I got stuck in an urgent care and a kid had a horrible asthma attack and they had to call an ambulance, and like, talk about waiting. Like, I was there for 3 hours. And I remember at one point I stepped out of the room and I didn't know what was going on. And the practitioner got very annoyed at me. I was just like, can you just let me know? Like, I was very calm and they were really worked up, and I saw how scared they were. And it, made me realize sometimes these people are dealing with big, scary issues. And so for them, some woman who has like bronchitis isn't as important as a little kid who's having an asthma attack. And I think that's the real human problem, which is that at the end of the day, the practitioners are really the core function of an urgent care. Do the patient's feelings matter as much as the staff's feelings? That's another really good human problem to think through. How do you put a pin in it for your clients? Do you ever say to them, this is the solvable problem, so let's stick with that problem? Or do you just try to come to some sort of consensus around what you're really trying to solve for?
Well, it's about prioritization, right? When we look at it, let's think about it from a journey perspective. And we look at every touch points, and we're looking at where are our best opportunities to improve the journey. So what we look for is, number one, what are the defining moments of the journey? What are the moments that really impact whether people feel like it was positive or negative? If there's a frustration point, a boiling point that where they say, I am never coming back to this urgent care again, or whatever it might be, like, those are important points. And that's where we focus our time. And so we look for those defining moments. And then we start to say, okay, if we go through a co-creation process, for example, where we co-create solutions with patients and staff, then we have ideas, but we don't have limitless budget. And so then we start to prioritize. We think about the business impact. We think about the impact on patients. We think about effort. So if what are the low-hanging fruit, the things that we could do quickly without a huge budget, let's roll that out. And then the other things, we may have to prioritize them and get them on a roadmap. But that is a big challenge, because we can come out of a human-centered design effort with great ideas, and we can see what this new experience could be. But then we have to say, okay, now how are we actually going to accomplish this? And so that's the big part. So usually we have a roadmap and we're thinking, okay, here are the things we could do this year. Here are the things we need to start thinking about, budgeting for, socializing these ideas around the organization so we can get buy-in. And so that becomes a big process as well.
That makes sense. I like the idea of like a low-hanging fruit goal and a later goal. What's keeping you awake at night right now? Besides the state of the world, which if you can save us, you should not be talking to me about patient journey.
Right. What is keeping me awake right now? Well, I mean, it is a bit the state of the world, but it's the state of the healthcare world. When I think about healthcare, I think it's just how things are so volatile right now. We went from unprecedented times and now all of a sudden, we just left that and now we're in the era of uncertainty. And that really impacts so much. It impacts patients. It impacts all of our partners at healthcare organizations, not knowing about funding, the research challenges. All of these elements makes a huge difference on patient care. And we see that in everybody we talk to. And I think that's the thing that I'm thinking about all the time. How can we make sure that we're doing all of this important work impactfully when a lot of the people we work with at healthcare organizations feel like they can't make the decisions because everything's so uncertain right now. So yeah. I think that's the biggest thing. And we're just looking for how we can help them with that. How can we understand how the patient perspective is changing through this? And then as changes happen, how can we better understand how the patient journey might be impacted?
This whole decade needs a redo.
That is true. It makes you think, what were we all thinking like New Year's Eve on, going into 2020? We're probably all so positive back then. I don't even know.
But here's the thing that I think, there is a lot of volatility and there's a lot of scariness and there's a lot of unknown. On the flip side, we are making people better. For better or worse, however we're doing it, we are still making people better. And I think, my mom just recently had a cancer journey and she's okay now. She has to be monitored carefully, but right now she's cancer-free. And I watched what happened there and it's extraordinary what they can do now. It's just extraordinary. And it was hard and it's horribly painful and emotionally painful and, all the things that you would expect from it. But I walked away feeling really surprised at how inspiring the whole thing was. That we train these doctors, we train these nurses, these physical therapists, these rehab people. Like, it's unbelievable how much we really have done and how much better the patient experience really has become. A shout out to Mott Cancer Center for just an extraordinary patient experience. So I think that you're 100% right. There's an upward trend. There's an upward trajectory of doing better. And it's up to what you just said. It's up to people like you who are very thoughtful to just keep helping brands realize like these are the things you can do to incrementally improve so that when we look back 10 years, 20 years, we see that we were moving in the right direction. I think that's what I keep trying to go back to in a time when it just feels like, are we going to be obliterated tomorrow? It
is. No, but you bring up a really good point. And I go through a lot of this. I'm the caregiver for my 93-year-old dad. And so I spend a lot of time in healthcare environments as kind of that caretaker for the patient. And I see so many great things. And I meet so many inspiring people. And I know how hard they're working and the impact they're making. And then just within our role, with the organizations we engage with, and just you get to, that's one thing I love is you get to meet people that are doing such amazing things in the care, in how they're approaching ensuring equity for people in care, and how they're, really evolving the types of care you give. Like we talked about the cancer treatments these days, some of the radiation that can be so pinpointed where we had to just, just really approach, So there are amazing things. And so that's what we have to be focused on, right? Like how we can help all of those things scale and, continue to evolve and do better things for people. Yeah.
That's great. I think it's really important, especially we're not mired in the politics of the health system. And when I do talk to my clients, I always try to give them the perspective of you're so inside of it, but you don't realize like what people see on the outside. And I think our society lurches towards negativity, but we have to try to do everything that we can to try to look back and remember that we're in a better place than we used to be. Steve, how can people find you?
They can find me. I am on LinkedIn quite often. So Steve Koch, also castandhue.com is our website. And you can learn a little bit more about our approach to human-centered design. Oh, that means a lot coming from you, Ahava.
Gorgeous, gorgeous website. I love it. If you have a burning question, put it in the comments or email it to me at ahava.leaptech@ahamediagroup.com. We'll see you next time.